Leadership Culture of Innovation webinar, which will be presented by Jonathan Behar at the Center for Creative Leadership. My name is Tracy Dobbins. I'm an event manager at the Center for Creative Leadership, also known as CCL, and I will serve as the host for today's webinar. For more than 4 decades, CCL has leveraged the power of leadership to drive the results that matter the most to you. As a global provider of leadership development solutions and innovative research, CCL has been consistently ranked by clients as one of the top executive education institutions in the Financial Times for 13 consecutive years. We hope you enjoy today's session and find it a valuable leadership development tool for you and your organization. The program will last 60 minutes today, but before I turn it over to Jonathan, I'd like to just review a few tips so that you get the most out of the webinar. We invite you to interact with us utilizing the chat tool provided on the right side of the screen. Let's enter your question or comment, and you can direct it to all participants, and we will address during the question and answer session at the end of the webinar. You may also communicate directly with me by addressing your comment to host, presenter, or panelist. We will include a few polls in today's session, and we ask you to participate by clicking on your answer choice and then clicking on the submit button. We realize that many of you have a group with you today, so please take a consensus of the group and make one response. In your confirmation emails, you received a link to course materials, and we hope you've printed these out. Materials included information about our presenter and a copy of his presentation, as well as a white paper. Now I'd like to introduce Jonathan Behar. Jonathan is a senior faculty member at the Center for Creative Leadership and works with organizations to develop leadership and innovation solutions necessary for growth. Jonathan has extensive experience in program design and technology-enabled learning, and is also one of CCL's subject matter experts in the area of innovation. That's referred to as an innovation geek in form. Before joining the Center for Creative Leadership, Jonathan spent 14 years as the president and co-founder of a global training and organizational development firm where he designed and delivered programs in the areas of creative thinking, strategic planning, group meeting facilitation, and innovation leadership development. Welcome to the CCL Leading Effectively series, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Hello, everybody. Thanks for being willing to spend an hour with us learning a little bit more about innovation. We're going to talk today, as you can see from the title slide, it's all about creating a leadership culture. And so we're going to talk about a couple of different things. We'll talk a little bit about what is a framework for understanding how leadership fits into innovation, and then we'll also give you some tools that you can use within your organization to start bringing more innovations forward. So fundamentally, the reason that we're talking about culture of innovation is because culture eats strategy. It's one of these things that is almost a given these days, and you can come up with the best strategy, the best innovation strategy for your organization, for your group, for your particular area of responsibility. But unless the organizational culture is receptive to it, it's not going to happen. And so there's a huge impact that leadership has on the culture of innovation. And culture of innovation really is the foundation that's going to help us make those innovation strategies really happen. So we'll spend a little bit of time unpacking that, but I just want to share this lovely image with you, something that will stick in your mind as we think about this notion of culture eating strategy. So let's just jump into our agenda. So our agenda, we're going to start with an overview, which is where we are right now. Hopefully that's going okay. We'll talk a little bit about innovation leadership principles in terms of what does innovation leadership look like? What does CCL know about innovation leadership, and where are we coming from when we talk about innovation specifically? Innovation is one of those words that covers a lot of different areas. We'll talk about that. We'll start to talk about a particular ground-shifting concept of innovation for me, which really takes a look at leadership skills by organizational level. And it's the notion that one size does not fit all when we start to talk about innovation skills for a leader. And then we'll talk about, very quickly, just a framework for creating a culture of innovation, and then we'll get into some specific tools that hopefully you'll be able to use the moment this webinar is over, perhaps even sooner. So we'll give you a couple of tools, one for evaluation and one for reframing challenges, and we'll wrap up with a Q&A session. So that's our agenda. That's where we're going to go for the next 55 minutes or so. And so before we jump into the content, I'd like to start with a poll. So we're we're going to put up a poll here for you, and we're going to ask you to just take a few moments to answer these two questions, which you should be seeing on your screen right now. Question number one is, how important is innovation to you? And you should see a poll box on the right-hand side of your screen with two questions. Second question is, how effective would you rate your organization at innovation? We'll give you a moment to answer that. If you're working individually, just click on those. If you're sitting with a group of people, do some quick consensus, and we'll give you a few seconds to add in your responses.
Just make sure you click that submit button at the bottom after you make your choices.
Click on the radio button and then click submit, and we'll see how the responses are tallying up. Good. So these half of our folks have responded already, making good progress.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close off the poll now. So get those last minute responses.
Give a 5-second warning. Oh, okay. We have closed the poll.
Well, those last ones are coming in.
Oh, good. Okay, great. So, great. So 7 seconds left.
Right.
5, 4, 3, 2, no pressure. Great. All right. Thank you very much for submitting those responses. And we can see that there seems to be some clear consensus. The usual bell-shaped curve is showing up for us. I believe our participants can see the results now?
They can.
Great. So you can see the results there. And so clearly in question number one, how important is innovation? Boy, if you look at that top two box in terms of rather important and very important, there's most folks say it's really, really, really important. Something, what is that, 92%, if I'm doing my math correctly? Somebody check me on that. And then in terms of how effective is your organization, unfortunately, we're a little bit further down the scale. So we're at somewhat and moderately effective seems to be the bulk of those responses. So interestingly, and maybe not coincidentally, this parallels a study that CCL did with about 500 leaders not long ago. And so, similar to what you folks just said, most folks say that innovation is important. So when we ask our CCL leader clients, 94% of the people say it's important or very important. Very similar to our results. And when you ask the question, how effective are you at innovation, only 14% of the people said, hey, we're really effective at innovation. And so in a very similar way, there is a gap there. So there is a big difference between how important it is and how good we are at it, thus the focus on innovation. And so, innovation leadership has been my focus for about almost 25 years now. And so there are a bunch of things that we at CCL have noticed over the years that the research has really validated. And so we're putting out there some key principles, some key foundations of our work on innovation. And so I'd like to just talk quickly about them. So number one is that as I mentioned earlier, innovation covers a lot of different areas. And so what we're talking about when we're talking about innovation specifically is innovation leadership. So leadership is the major factor in the success or failure of an organization's ability to innovate. That's what we've seen. That's what the organization talks about. We've seen lots of different strategic approaches, lots of different tactical approaches, lots of different tools, techniques, mindsets brought into organizations, but without leadership being 100% behind it, without there being a leadership culture that embraces innovation, again, culture eats the strategy, and so that goes away. So the next point to think about is that leadership must appreciate and leverage the natural tension that exists between innovation and running the business. So I'd like you to think about there's two very natural and very prevalent tensions that exist in your organization, and one of them is we've got to run the business. Right? So we've got to do the things that help us meet our numbers, that allow us to drive revenue, profit, so that we can sustain our organization. We've got to run the business. And equally important is that we've got to do innovation. We've got to make innovation happen. We've got to be constantly thinking about how do we move forward, how do we adapt, how do we disrupt, how do we bring new things into our business so that we can continue to compete as our competitors move forward and as the environment around us changes. And so there's a natural tension. And so the problem is, for most organizations, when push comes to shove, we have a tendency to choose running the business before doing innovation. We have a tendency to choose running the business over doing innovation. And that's fine in the short term. You can get away with that in the short term. But if you do that long term, that's when the that's when the organization starts to suffer from a lack of innovation. So there's a natural tension, and when push comes to shove, most organizations, almost all organizations, end up running the business, especially if they're an established organization. So there's the natural tension between innovative thinking, sort of doing innovation, and business thinking about running the business shows up in some different ways, and there's some really natural tensions in here. And it's not to say that one is right and one is wrong. In fact, one is right, and the other one is also right, which is an interesting challenge for us, right? And so we need to understand meaning, and we also want results. Innovation thrives on relishing ambiguity. Business, not so much. Too much ambiguity is a bad thing. Right? Innovation says there's always a better way. Business thinking is there's right and wrong. Right? Holding multiple possibilities, being quick to decide. Two very different approaches. I won't read through all of these, but you can see that there is a real tension here that exists between these two mindsets. And again, not one is right and one is wrong, but they're both important, and we need to be able to balance those effectively. So the next one is the third bullet point up there is that leadership must embrace the constancy of change and recognize that sustainable breakthrough requires agility, right? So that constancy of change, it's always happening, and we can't just sit around and wait for change to happen because it's always happening. And so we have to be dissatisfied with the status quo. What's working right now is great, but we need to constantly be looking for a better way. Our CEO here at CCL, John Ryan, says that he wants people to be in a continual state of dissatisfaction with the way things are. Really talking about that constancy of change and the need for agility. Fourth bullet point up there is that context matters. And so, this is where best practices will only really take you so far, right? Context matters because innovation looks different depending on the collective. So depending on your organization, that's going to be very different, right? And so you could have two organizations, equal size, in the same industry, really focused on very different things, and so innovation looks differently. I used to spend a lot of time working in the pharma arena. I still do, actually. And I remember working with two organizations that, by all accounts, at the surface level, looked to be exactly the same. One of them was really driven by research and development. The other one really driven by sales. The one that was driven by R&D, you looked at their CEOs and where their leaders came from, they all came out of the R&D pipeline. The other organization, driven by sales, their CEOs tended to come out of the sales and marketing arena. Not that one is right and one is wrong, but innovation looks very different in both of those organizations. What they valued was very different and very distinctive. And so just to say, well, that's what they're doing, we should be doing the same thing in terms of our strategy or in terms of our culture development, that's a dangerous strategy because context matters. I wouldn't look at things in terms of best practices. I would look at things from the perspective of what can we learn from what they're doing that's going to be useful for us. And then the last thing, again, the last part of the foundation of our work on innovation is we recognize that innovation requires an enterprise-wide perspective. Right? So it's okay to look at it from your perspective or the responsibility of your area of influence, but we have to look across the whole organization, right? Whether that's a business or a government organization or a not-for-profit, we need to look across the entire organization and recognize that innovation looks different at the different levels of leadership. Innovation looks different at the different levels of leadership. And so we'll spend a little bit of time digging into that a little more deeply. So just to remind you, come back to our key point here, really is that culture eats strategy, and really nobody has more of an immediate influence on the culture than the leader. And that's why leaders matter. That's why leadership matters, and that's how leadership impacts impacts innovation. So just to sort of lay this out in a graphical form, so your organization probably has some sort of business strategy. And, if you're in a government organization, you've got a strategy in terms of how you run your part of the organization. If you're in a not-for-profit, you probably don't call it a business strategy, but it's really the strategy that our organization is founded on. We know what we're going to do. We know how we deliver our services. We know how we create value for the organization. That's the foundation of everything we do, that business strategy. On top of the business strategy, we've got that green triangle, which is all about our leadership strategy. Right? We need to make sure that we've got a leadership strategy that supports the business strategy. If you've got a business strategy and your leadership strategy is not aligned with that, then we're in trouble. Right? The other part of that, there also needs to be an innovation strategy. Right? So we know how we're going to run the business. How are we going to do innovation? And so that blue triangle is about the innovation strategy. And bridging those two things and really sort of serving as a keystone, if you will, is that culture of innovation. Right? The business strategy can't move forward without the culture of innovation. And the culture of innovation really needs to be supported by leadership and also by the innovation practices. So that's one way to sort of think about how all these things fit together. And I am not for one second going to say that you don't need to pay attention to your business strategy if you've got a good culture of innovation. What I'm saying is your business strategy won't move forward without paying attention to the culture of innovation. So with that, let me talk a little bit about a ground-shifting concept. And this came out of some interesting conversations with some of the other innovation experts here at CCL. And I remember somebody put forth this notion to me that innovation looks different at different levels of the organization. And I remember my immediate response to newness, like most folks, and I'm not proud of this, my immediate response to this was, no, that's not true. Innovation is innovation. It looks the same no matter where you are. And I have come to embrace this notion as being a real ground-shifting concept. And so here's the notion, is that innovation is not a one-size-fits-all proposition. Right? So I love that picture. That's a picture of my daughter. Thank you. I know. She's cute. She had no hair. She has hair now. Don't worry. So this is my daughter when she was this is of her at about 18 months. She was wearing my boots, which fit me very well, and they kept me warm in Chicago winters. They don't fit her very well. She couldn't walk very far without them falling off. And so similar to my boots and my daughter, innovation is not a one-size-fits-all proposition. And so if you try and roll innovation through the organization, just paying attention to one thing for everyone, you're going to miss some things. So just to take a step back, so innovation skills vary by organizational level, and so at CCL we identify 5 different very clear leadership levels, right? So there's leading self, sometimes known as sole contributors, and these are the folks who have no direct leadership responsibility or formal leadership authority, but are certainly acting as leaders on project teams in terms of how they role model to other folks. They are the folks who don't have direct reports, but they're leading by themselves within their own circle. Right? And then we've got leading others, and this would be your first level supervisor. So leaders of others are people who have a team directly reporting to them. Then we've got leaders of managers, and these are the people who are basically the leaders of others report to them. And so these leaders of managers have people underneath them who are also managing teams. So we're taking steps up in the organizational org chart, the hierarchy, if you will. And then we get into the leaders of functions, right? And so these folks have a lot of leaders of managers reporting to them. And so these folks are managing a function within an organization like engineering or, communications or sales or, advocacy or whatever the function is. They lead that particular function. And then you get into the leaders of the organization, right? The generals, the admirals, the executive directors, the CEOs, the C-suite type folks. And so those are the folks who are directly responsible for everything that happens within the organization. And so as you look at this, I'd like you to think about what are some of the things that those different levels need to pay attention to as we think about innovation. Right? So we're going to put up a poll now. We'll go to the next slide and open a poll. And so the next slide basically asks you to think about this. for those that are at the leading self or leading others, sort of the left-hand side of the spectrum, the lower end of the hierarchy, if you will, which are the most two important skills on which to focus? Which are the ones that really fit into their areas of responsibility and perhaps accountability? I'll give you a moment to look at those. So there's 6 different responses. Read those. Click on your answer. And I'll stop talking so you can read now.
Keep it up open a few more seconds here so you could quickly make your choices.
Great. So responses are starting to come in now as folks have read all of these things. So the 2 most important skills on which to focus at that lower level of the org chart. All right, so we'll take about 10 seconds to finish it up.
Tally it up and share the results.
Last chance to vote. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, polls closing. So hopefully those of you that are sitting and talking with other people listening to this, you've had a good conversation about that. And if you voted alone, you had the opportunity to see that. So if you take a look at the results, you see that the bulk of folks, so about 55% of people said that the answers are B, and about the same said E. And I would argue that would be my guesses as well. So those other things may well be important, but probably the most important thing as you think about lower in the organization are those 2 things, B, so generating creative solutions and the ability to work really well on an innovation team. And so as we go to the next slide, we'll take a look at the innovation levels one at a time to see what those things look like. So if you're leading yourself, what we're paying attention to here is 3 key skills. Right? One is knowing how to generate creative solutions, and so that's where you want to have a good process to rely on, something like creative problem solving or design thinking or synectics or TRIZ or some methodology that will help you generate new solutions. Also, you need to be able to work really well and participate on a diverse innovation team, right? So not just working with people who are just like you, who have the same perspective and thoughts as you, but on a diverse team, and to be able to work well with those other folks. Innovation is a team sport. Right? And then the last thing is to find sources of inspiration for new approaches. So those are the fundamental responsibilities for somebody at the leading self level. And so that's the starting point where we sort of enter the organizational hierarchy. As we get into the next level of leading others, we add to those, right? And so you need to be able to do those other things, but more important at the leading others level is to know about and lead the group innovation processes, right? So where leading oneself is about creating, this level is much more about facilitating, right? So being able to lead a group innovation process, being able to lead them through the work that needs to happen. It's about being an effective team leader and also a project manager, right? So not just inspiring and influencing and making sure that people are doing what they need to be doing, but also making sure that we've got the systems, constraints, the process, that we're moving on track. So there's that balance again between running the team, in this case the project manager, running the business, and also doing innovation, being a leader, right? And then, of course, it's also about finessing resources, probably from outside their unit, right? Getting additional resources, whether it's going up the chain of command or across to work with other folks, but resources are really critical, and so those are key areas around leading others. So as we go to the next level there, we talked about creating, we talked about facilitating. Now we're really sort of talking about connecting and championing. Right? So when we're leading managers, what starts to show up as being important is being able to support and protect the innovation team from what's higher up in the organization and also from other parts of the organization. Right? So making sure that we can support and protect the team so that they can do the innovation work without getting bogged down in the organizational systems and processes which may well be there to support folks but may in fact get in the way of innovation. That happens frequently. It's also about ensuring due diligence and building a case for grassroots innovation. So sometimes we work on innovation projects that come from those folks who are, tasked with deciding where we're coming from, and sometimes those big ideas come from other places. Sometimes those big ideas come from those folks in other locations of the organization who've got a brilliant idea, and so then it's a question of how do we build that case so that the organization is willing to move forward on something that nobody else has seen. And then the last part of that is building groups that are working on similar challenges so that we can ensure the constructive cooperation. So it's about bridging those groups. So not just the group that I'm working on, but also bridging across some of the other parts of the organization. And maybe some of my teams, making sure that they're getting connected when they're working on the same project. So whole time, just to make sure you're still tracking with us, we ask questions about those folks at the sort of the lower levels of the organization. Now let's ask the question about those folks who are at the top level of the organization. So for those leading at the top of the organization, which are the two most important skills that are unique to that level? Skills that are unique to the level at the top of the organization. Again, executive directors, admirals, secretaries, CEOs, COOs, those sorts of folks. What do they need to be paying attention to?
I think the responses are coming in quicker with each poll.
They are indeed.
It opened just a little bit longer for those last minute responses.
All right, so about 10 more seconds.
Yep.
Last chance to vote. 4, 3, 2, 1. Polls are closing. So we'll post the results here. And here you see that there is an even more clear consensus on the fact that really for those folks who are at the top of the organization, the unique skills that they need to be able to do, and they need to be able to do all of these things, don't get me wrong, but what's unique to the folks at the top of the organization is a need to set an innovation strategy for the organization. Right? So making sure that we have a sense of, in general, where are we going. At Center for Creative Leadership, we articulate what leadership is all about is it's the ability to create direction, alignment, and commitment. And so creating that direction around innovation, that innovation strategy, that's very important for innovation. That's what leaders need to do. Second part up there is letter C, which is communicating the vision over and over and over and over and over and over again to recognize that folks need to understand where are we going, how are we going to get there, what are the things that are going to take us that way. As somebody famous once said, it may have been Jack Welch, as a leader, if you're unwilling to tell the same story over and over and over and over again, then you have no business being a leader. You may get tired of saying the same things over and over again, but just because you said it once, just because you emailed it once, doesn't mean that anybody heard it, doesn't mean that it's happening. We need to be able to do that over and over and over again. So we're now at the leading the function level. So if you look at that bar chart along the bottom, we're at the second to the highest level, and so these are folks who are leading functions within the organization. And so the innovation skills that are necessary here is the ability to manage conflicting demands for resources, right? So if you got a bunch of folks who are trying to advocate for grassroots innovations, reporting to you, and are trying to finesse resources from various places, you need to make some choices. So we need to manage the conflict as folks are looking for resources. We need to initiate those strategic and structural changes that will accommodate those promising innovations. Right? So you think about truly disruptive change typically requires things that the organization is not currently doing. So how do we set in place those practices, those structural things, those strategies that need to happen in order to accommodate the new ways of doing things? And we need to establish an innovation strategy that bridges the silos, right? So making sure that if we're in charge of engineering, for example, that we're also making sure that we're connecting with the folks in sales and marketing to make sure that as we're taking a look at, this new offering that we're going to provide, how do we make sure that our communications folks know about it and we can learn from their expertise and they can learn from our expertise to ensure that it's going to be successful. Bridging silos, spanning those boundaries, working across the barriers in the organization, critical skill for innovation. Also at this level, boy, it just becomes even more important as you move up the org chart, is about modeling behavior and driving communication that sets the tone in support of innovation. Right? We need to make sure that we as leaders, really at all levels, but especially at this level, this is the level where folks are really starting to pay attention to what are they saying versus what are they doing. Saying we want innovation, but then, killing new ideas, that's not a strategy that leads to innovation. And then the last thing is really about managing the innovation pipeline. So making sure that we're very clear about what's going to happen, what are we doing, how are we going to make sure that we've got some new ideas, that we've got some short-term strategies, we've got some long-term strategies, we've got some easy implementations and some quick shifts, and we've also got some really difficult and disruptive things in the pipeline. So that's really critical. So then we go to the next level of leading the organization. So again, folks at the top of the org chart, what's really critical here is we need to be able to set the strategy, the innovation strategy for the organization. Really need to foster the culture of innovation. We're talking about fostering that culture. Leaders have a huge impact on that, so they need to make sure that they are mandating that culture of innovation, and they're also doing the things that it takes to make sure that that happens. Again, modeling behaviors is critical in here. You need to be able to communicate that vision over and over and over and over and over and over to make sure people get it. And then it's also critical that these folks are showing support for different, for new, for disruptive ideas to make sure that the organization recognizes, that people recognize that it's useful, that it's important, and that it's actually desired, right? So that they don't have to be, working in, in quiet corners. Don't tell anybody I'm brewing this cool thing. Right. Then, of course, it's also trying to figure out ways to hear and see unfiltered concepts. So what we know about leaders at the top of the organization, the higher you go in the organization, the less you hear, the less you know about things, the more isolated you become. And so it's really critical for an organization, for an organizational leader, to find ways to hear and see those unfiltered concepts. Whether it's walking around the offices, whether it's calling people, a few levels below you to ask what's happening, whether it's, running some of those, really useful listening sessions, brainstorming sessions. How do you get the unfiltered concepts? I remember talking to a organizational leader one time. He said, I'm still frustrated trying to drive innovation in this organization because by the time the ideas get to me, they have been de-risked. De-risked. In other words, all of the risk, anything novel, anything different, anything that's potentially unique has been stripped away from them, and so you just end up with a bunch of, vanilla ideas. Not that there's anything wrong with vanilla. But the vanilla ideas are the ones that just, they're interesting, kinda, but they're not the sort of thing that's going to set the world on fire and really create some disruptive change or is going to drive the organization forward in any meaningful way. So, we've talked about those 5 levels. You can see them up here. One more poll for you. So, which level of your organization, which level requires the most development to create a culture of sustainable innovation? So this is your best guess. This is anonymous. There's no right or wrong answer to this. I'm just curious to see where folks are showing up in terms of where is there a need for development so that we can drive that culture of sustainable innovation. Give you a moment to vote.
Right, we'll keep it open just a little bit longer.
Interesting. Interesting. All right. So the last 10 seconds to vote. Get your votes in now. You're working on consensus. Time to click on something in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. And so the polls are closed. We'll show you those results. And so what we can see here, it's interesting. It's kind of half of a pine tree. So we've got 2% of individuals, 9% of leaders of others, 16% of leaders of managers, 20% of leaders of the function, 25% of leaders of the organization. So it's really interesting. And so I don't know statistically about the folks who are attending this particular webinar, looking at the titles that folks submitted. And we've got a good bunch of sort of middle and senior level folks on the call, and so I'm not sure if folks are pointing the finger at themselves and saying, boy, I really need to be doing more about this, or if folks are just pointing up the org chart and saying, you know what, management's got to do more. And that's not an uncommon story. And, of course, when we talk to the folks who are leading the organization, what they typically do is they point down the org chart and say, I really need my people to do more. So there's an interesting tension in there. So if we were to have to articulate the innovation leadership development process sort of at a very high level, it might look something like this. Right, and this is the work that we do with our clients to take a look at how do we develop innovation within the organization. So what is the desired outcome? In other words, why innovation? Innovation is an important strategy, but it's not an end unto itself. Right? It's a means to an end. So the question is, what is the end? We want to understand what that organizational assessment is. CCL has a really nice climate assessment called KEYS that measures that. Find out more about that on our website. We want to define our metrics and objectives. What are we really trying to accomplish here? We want to craft our innovation strategy. We want to make sure that we've got a team of champions in the organization who can start to spread the message throughout, sort of spread that like wildfire. We want to implement that plan with training and facilitation and idea management systems and all that sort of good stuff that's useful. Track the results, share those successes, and start to reassess and adjust. So I'm not going to spend any more time on it than this, just to say that there's a lot involved with innovation leadership development. It's not just about doing a training program or not just about putting in people's KPIs. There's much more to it than that if we truly want to shift the culture. So that's all nice, but then the question is, okay, so what do I do? What do I, as an individual, as a leader in the organization, how can I make this stuff happen? So I just want to ask you for your comments. So here I'm going to ask you to use the chat box. I want to share a concept with you on the next slide. And so the next slide is, I think it's a really interesting idea, right? So the idea is, it's a vending machine idea, and you put your money into the machine, and you put your dog into the machine, and then your dog gets washed and dried in the vending machine. So it's a vending machine that cleans dogs. In the chat section of the screen, would you just take a moment and just, what are your concepts, or excuse me, what are your comments about this concept? So what do you think? What are your responses? Type in your comments.
You can direct it to all participants, all attendees, so that everyone can see each other's answers.
Have some people who are already working on line extensions.
Yes.
I love that. Your comments about the dog washing idea. Okay. People are feeling sorry for the dog. We don't have dogs. I'm sorry. People willing to try it. Some people think it's silly. Some people try anything once. They're looking for the loyalty program. These are people who get their dogs cleaned a lot. It's a crazy idea. I don't want to put my dog into this machine. Great. It's too impersonal. The dog doesn't get any caring or love. The dog would get scared. We put our children in there. Amen. Good. Want to know if anyone needs this? Do all breeds cost the same? Feel sorry for the dog. Want to drug the animal first. Nice. Good. Well, and also cut the dog's hair. I did more line extensions. I love this group. This is fantastic. Want to put them next to dog parts. Good. Want to have them accept credit cards. Good. Some questions, some comments, clearly some concern. So nice. So, good. Shampoo fragrances. Good. And something that will cover up the smell of skunky dog. Maybe that's my own experience. So good. So I asked for your comments, and notice that a lot of the responses tended to be towards the negative and skeptical side. Certainly not all of them. There are some people who are willing to try it. My guess is if most of the folks in this call are honest with themselves, the first response is, wait a minute, you're kidding, right? It's just an idea, right? So the challenge that we have is that new ideas look strange, and that the best of ideas tend to look weird and unusual for people. One of the great quotes around this is that ideas are like children. Your own are great, right? All the others, on the other hand, they're kind of loud and obnoxious and sticky and smelly. So ideas are very much like children in that regard. So our own ideas are brilliant. We have great ideas. But as leaders, we regularly face ideas from other folks that just don't seem to have anything going to it. And so let's spend a little bit of time talking about how do you treat new ideas. And so I'm just guessing here. I'm guessing you don't have enough acronyms in your organization, so I'm going to give you one more. And this acronym is POINT. And POINT stands for 4 ways to respond to a new idea. 4 sequential ways, in fact. So the first one is pluses. So first, we want to start with praise. We want to look for the value in all new ideas. So the first is the plus. What's good about the idea? So whenever anybody comes to you as a leader with a crazy, wacky, outlandish new idea, first look for what's good now. Then look for the opportunities, the O, right? What might be good in the future? And then no idea is perfect, right? Nothing is perfect from the get-go. So we want to articulate the issues so that we can improve it, so that we can make it even stronger without losing the pluses and the opportunities that we've articulated. So we want to talk about the question, the how-to, how might, and what ways might. And then we want to use our new thinking to overcome the issues. So if we've got an issue around, this dog thing, like, yeah, boy, it's too expensive, so how might we reduce the cost, for example? Then we want to apply some new thinking to think about how might we reduce the cost of that. And there's a lot of different ideas we can come up with. There are probably some in your head even as we speak. So what I'd like to do then is just sort of practice this, again, using the chat box. We'll do this very quickly. And so if we go to the next slide, we're going to try it. And so what we'll do is we'll take a look at this vending machine idea. Again, you put your dog, your money into the machine. The dog gets washed and dried. I'd like you to just add to the chat box all of the pluses of this idea, all of the pluses of this idea. What do you like about this idea? There are some of them already in there, but now just be very deliberate about writing down in the chat box, what do you like? What do you like? So quick and easy, there's convenience, self-serving, self-service, not self-serving, self-service. The mess stays in the machine. Good, it's self-contained, a lot of convenience, inexpensive. The individual doesn't get wet, just the dog. I love that. Available 24/7. Great. Yeah, people don't like washing dogs, so it solves the problem. There's a consumer need that's articulated there. It's a new business opportunity. Convenience. Great, no scratch and biting. Fantastic. You don't smell like wet dogs. I hear that. So good. So we got some pluses. That's good. Now we can start to see that, okay, so there's something to this idea. There's something good about this. The pluses are the things that as we improve, as we adapt, as we move the idea forward, we want to make sure we don't lose those pluses. That's why it's important to start there. So that's the first part, the P for point. The second part, O, is about opportunities. So what are some of the opportunities that might exist if we were to implement this solution? So look into the future and what might it do? Start it with it might. So what are some of the good things it might do if we were to implement this solution? So now we're at opportunities. Starting with it might. Well, it might catch on, it might save time, it might work for kids. It might create a perception of inhumane, but we're looking for the good stuff that might exist. So some of the good opportunities moving forward. So what else might it do? Might work for other animals. Might allow us to franchise. Might encourage more people to want dogs. It might create fewer smelly dogs. That's nice. It might reduce the amount of fleas. It might save water. Nice. It might be an opportunity for a bar for the waiting time. More line extensions. It's a great creative group. Love this. Might create a cat version. Might make the dog nicer. Fantastic. So we've got a bunch of opportunities. So the pluses are, what do we know about it? It's good right now. Opportunities, good things, looking into the future that it might create once we implement it. So now let's go to the issues. And so, again, same concept. So what are some of the things about this that are not quite perfect? And so I'd like you to phrase them as a question, not just to say it's inhumane, but how might we ensure the dog is safe? Or how might we make it a pleasant experience for the dog? So what are the issues phrased as a question? The reason we phrase the question this way is because it naturally invites solutions. Naturally invites solutions. So what are some of the issues that you see? How might we keep the cost down? How might we make sure this thing actually works? How to make it safe? How might we clean dogs of various sizes? How might we make sure the dog is comfortable? How might we make sure that the dog is able to breathe? How might we ensure the machine doesn't run into issues? Good, they're coming in fast and furious, faster than I can read. How might we make sure we reduce the amount of water? How might we market this? How might we size and price for the different types of dogs? How might we handle the calls from the people for the ethical treatment of animals? Nice. How might we put in a panic button for the owner? That's great, great. So some significant issues showing up in there, and it's true, right? No idea is perfect right off the bat. So let's go to the last part of our acronym. So we talked about pluses, opportunities, issues, POI. Now we're going to talk about NT, new thinking. So same concept. Let's assume that we've decided to tackle this very important issue. I'm a dog lover. I'm a dog owner, right? How might we ensure the dog's safety? So how to ensure the dog's safety? So we can just take a moment and enter into the chat box your best thinking, your new thinking, new ideas for how to ensure the dog's safety. So please type that into the chat box. So we'll try it on people first. If the dog, a pair of goggles to wear, bathtub, the seatbelt, we'll sedate the dog, we'll put in cushions, make sure there's an adjustable water level, a non-contact device, non-slip floor mat, a liability waiver, a padded box, just like my office, gentle water, no tear shampoo, no moving parts, give the dog a helmet, maybe the owner a helmet, depending on where you are in the process. Some calming music and emergency exit. Get PETA to test this. This is great. So fantastic. So a lot of great ideas, some new thinking in terms of how to deal with those issues. So in case you haven't heard of this, there is such a product. It's called the Dog-O-Matic. It's a $30,000 machine designed by vets and engineers. You put your dog into the machine. The dog goes through a 4-minute wash cycle, a 30-second rinse, and a 20-minute dry. Prices start at about $20. The Easy Wash location in Vancouver washes about 150 dogs per month. And I love the idea of the panic button. And you can't see it in this photo, but the woman is actually standing in front. There's a big red button that says stop on it. And if you stop that, then the dog comes out. So here you see a dog that's apparently very happy to be washed and can't wait to see its owner again. So if you search on YouTube, you can see a video of this thing. There actually is a test of a guy actually getting into the machine and proving it was safe enough for your dog by showing that it was safe for a human as well. So that's the Dog-O-Matic. So then the question is, who cares about dog vending machines? Well, yeah, that's not the point. The point is point, right? So why do we use point? Why do we use praise first? Well, because it's a technique to look for the value in new ideas. We need to look for the value in all new ideas. That's probably the most important thing for anyone in an organization, any leader in an organization. Look for the value in new ideas. It's also a fair and respectful way to evaluate ideas. People say, well, this is just being nice, right? So it's not about being nice. It's about being fair and respecting the fact that people see the brilliance of their ideas, even if we, as the leader, don't. right? So it's a deliberate technique to avoid snap judgment. Another way of saying that is wrong judgment. It's an investment in developing your people in your organization. So as a leader, think about it. So if you got people coming at you with crazy ideas and you say no, they're probably not going to come back with more ideas. So if you want to continue the flow of ideas, you want to make sure that you're educating them and helping them see what you're seeing so that they can bring back ideas that make sense. So it's an investment in developing your people. And bottom line is, new ideas always seem strange, and so it requires work from the leader. So, one last quick technique for you, and this is about reframing the challenge, and it builds on what we saw in the issues piece, right? So the challenge that we have with innovation is that the problem that is presented is usually not the challenge that will get you where you want to go. And so we need to make sure we're looking at lots of different perspectives on any given challenge. So rockets have been in the news lately, and so for a long time the space shuttle was the closest thing it was a relaunchable rocket. It's not a terribly convenient way to do it, so we sent this thing up with with a fuel tank and a couple of solid rocket boosters. Those things dropped off. The shuttle went into space. It landed on the other side of the country. We then had to prep it, strap it to a 747, bring it back to the launch pad again, get another fuel tank, get more solid booster rockets, all these sorts of things. And so there was a prize several years ago, the Ansari X Prize, that offered, I believe it was $10 million to an entity, an organization that could create a rocket that could go into space and then be land safely and then be relaunched within the space of a week. And so I suppose if you hustled with the space shuttle, you might be able to do it, but that was really tough. They were looking for something more efficient than that. And so the winner of the Ansari X Prize was this group sponsored by Richard Branson, created by Scaled Composites, and it was basically this device that you see at the top of the screen. And this thing is the space ship that goes into outer space called Spaceship One. And it was actually launched not from the ground with a rocket, but by this airplane. You can see it sort of hanging in the middle of this airplane called the White Knight. And so what they did is it takes off like a traditional airplane, goes up very high, and then once you get to pretty close to space, then they fire off the rocket in Spaceship One, and poof, it goes into space. And so it's a completely different way of looking at how do you launch something into space. I saw a quote from the rocket that exploded yesterday. They said, if you're going to get this multi-ton vehicle into outer space, and it's got to be going, 25 times the speed of sound, I think is what it was, but really fast. It takes a lot of fuel. Well, this thing doesn't, because all it's got to do is just sort of go a little bit higher, and so it's a completely different approach to launching a rocket. John Dewey, who's a famous theorist around education, said a problem is half solved if it's properly stated. And so that's why we want to make sure that we're reframing problems, right? And so, this whole challenge of, that we sometimes hear in organizations, we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough money. Boy, if you start a conversation that way it either ends the conversation very quickly, or it turns into a meeting of the Ain't It Awful Club, right? Boy, we don't have enough money. Boy, you're right, I can't do any of my projects either. Life is terrible. And that's basically the course of the meeting. On the other hand, if we can frame it as a question, right? So how might I make more money? That naturally invites solutions. Right? And so then you go from how might I make more money, and we reframe it in some different ways. How might I save more money? In what ways might I reduce expenses? How might I take an inexpensive vacation? How to budget more effectively? In what ways might I save more of what I make? How to get down on spending? How might I retire comfortably? Those are very different frames on the problem. And that's good. They're all going to yield very different solutions. So we want to make sure that we're reframing those challenges appropriately. So some tips for you, and these are in the slide notes, of course, right? A good statement of a challenge is something that's a problem that needs to be solved, that's concise, is not bogged down with lots of criteria, and is affirmative in orientation, means it's something that we want to do. Rather than how might we not explode a rocket, right? How might we safely launch a rocket into space? So it's something that we really want. And then it also identifies who's the owner of the challenge. And then probably the thing that's most important here is that it begins with an invitational stem. What's an invitational stem, you ask? It's a way of starting a question that naturally invites solutions. if you start your questions with how to, or in what ways might, or how might, or what might be all those start a conversation. Those naturally invite solutions. Our brains don't like unanswered questions. So these invitational stems start to get people thinking about what's going on. So rather than saying, I have no money, we want to shift that to, in what ways might I obtain money? There's a big difference between those two. There's no time. Boy, that's terrible, right? Rather than how might we find additional resources? Those are the sorts of things that invite new thinking. So those invitational stems are really, really critical. So just want to do a very, very quick practice on this. We're going to do a little practice reframing. And I'd like you to just imagine, for the sake of this discussion, that we're all going to take a one-year vacation on the planet Mars. I'll bet that's someplace you've never been before. So as much as that's a cool goal, there are some issues with that, right? So I'd like you to think about what are all of the challenges that need to be overcome if we're going to go spend a year on vacation on Mars, right? And so what I'd like you to think about is just in the chat box, I'd like you to just jot down some questions, some invitational stems that are required for a vacation on Mars. So, if you're thinking, well, geez, you can't breathe on Mars, that's true. So one of the issues that if we're going to take this vacation, one of the issues then is how might I breathe on Mars? We'll just give you a moment to add those in. In what ways might we get there? That's great. How might we grow food on Mars? How might we get to an operated dog watcher out to the planet Mars? Nice connection. I love that. In what ways might we have food? How might we get some water? How might we entertain ourselves? How might we pass the time? In what ways might we raise the money to fund our trip? Great. How might I breathe? How will I stay warm? How might we do laundry for a year? Nice. What ways might we make sure we land on the planet instead of passing by? What's wrong with Saturn? I understand Saturn is lovely this time of year. What might be all the recreational choices? Fantastic. Great. So a lot of different reframes, and just notice that the solutions that these questions ask are very different. Right? They're going to create some very different solutions. So why do we reframe? Well, as I mentioned before, the problem that's presented rarely yields the most innovative answer. It helps to ensure that you're not focusing on symptoms, right? We want to reframe and make sure we're really working on the right problem. It also ensures agreement on the focus of our innovation efforts, so that you're not looking at one aspect of the problem, I'm looking at another aspect of the problem, and our conversation is going to be difficult, right? And it aids in creating buy-in to solutions. So we've talked a little bit about this whole notion of point. We've talked about reframing the problem. Let's skip the next slide. Let's go right to this one. This sums it all up. These tools are essential for having a culture that leads to innovation, because culture eats the strategy. The strategy is not enough by itself. So that's fundamentally the key point here. And so we've got a couple of minutes left. And so if you have some questions, I would invite you to put them in the chat box. We'll answer as many of them as we can before we have to shut down. I think there are some questions already that have come in, Tracy.
Right, I do have a few to start with from Paul. How courageous do innovation leaders need to be in surfacing unspeakable issues and practices in organizations?
Wow, great question. So how courageous do innovation leaders need to be? Boy, courage is one of those qualities that I would articulate as one of the top 5 qualities or values of an innovation leader. Courage is critical. Courage to try new things, to ask new questions, to really look at what's not happening or what's been a problem in the organization. Anytime a leader starts to unpack what's going on, there's a lot of things that are scary, and we start to realize just how close we are to, being overrun by our competitors. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say, with 1 being not courageous at all and 10 being extraordinarily courageous, I'd say a leader needs to be an 11 on that scale. So courage is critical. Courage is one of the 5 critical skills for innovation leaders.
And so, Stacey, how do you balance a fast slash unrealistic timeline for a challenge with getting to the most innovative solution?
Boy, that's a great tension. It's one of those tensions that exists. Same as doing innovation and running the business. It's one of those natural polarities. We've got to make sure that we're moving quickly so that we can beat our competitors to the marketplace, so that we can make sure we're taking advantage of the resources that we have in this fiscal year. We've got to be able to move fast and recognize that speed sometimes is an equal and opposite pull to quality or innovation. And so, there's not a right or wrong answer there. It's really a question of how do we make sure that we're doing the best balance that we can. Ambiguity is critical for innovation. Really is. A tolerance for ambiguity is a critical thinking skill for coming up with new ideas and making them happen in the organization. And at some point, we've got to shut down the ambiguity. We've got to make some decisions. We've got to move on. And so that's really a fundamental management question in terms of how do we make sure that we're striking the right balance. We want to make sure that we're getting the value from speed and the value from innovation without the downsides of moving too quickly, which is we shut down innovation, and the downsides of too much innovation, which is it takes a while. So we've really got to balance those. It's a polarity to be managed more so than it is a question to be answered. There's no right answer to that, but we need to make sure that we're paying attention to both of those things and recognizing what are the upsides of each, what are the downsides of each, and then how do we make sure we're not going too far into the downsides of one versus the other.
And we have reached the end of our time here right now, but please go ahead and continue to submit any questions into Jonathan. What we'll do is compile the questions and his responses and share that back out to the audience. Again, we thank you for your time today at today's webinar. We thank you, Jonathan, for contributing to the webinar series. I know we all learned more about the skills needed to drive innovation. So we'll stay online for about 5 more minutes. So we'll continue to send those questions into Jonathan. Before you leave, we ask that you complete the evaluation that we have pushed out to you. And just complete your responses and click on the submit button. And we will be following up to this webinar. We'll send you out an email and a link to the recording of the session, as well as the full copy of the slides for today's session. This will conclude our program. Again, we hope you enjoyed the session, and will join us again for a future Leading Effectively webinar. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.